Good morning, everybody. We are on the air with Julia Sanders, and we're going to start out by playing one of her most well-known pieces. It's called New Age Tango. So take a listen to this right now. How many pieces have you composed, and what levels are they?
Well, I've composed about 100 pieces. And when I first started composing, there was not a very large body of work for beginning students. And so that was some inspiration. So the levels range from advanced beginner up to advanced intermediate. And I wrote pieces for my students to play. Some of them were for lever harp and some for pedal harp. I also wrote pieces for all harpists to play at recitals, contests, gigs, and so forth. They range in styles from waltzes, tangos, sambas, a rag, a blues, and oriental pieces, among others. The waltz in C, which is also good on the piano, New Age Tango, Crustacean Caper, a samba, New Orleans Harp, a blues, and Prelude Oriental are examples.
What inspired you to write the Oriental pieces?
I am not sure that I know. I just like the sound, and it was so fun to be able to use the harp effects in there. It was really a good platform, if you will, to show off some of the really cool things that you can do on the harp, like prélude and the bended blues type notes, the vibrant sounds, and so forth. It just seemed to happen.
I think it's so fun for kids too, to be able to knock on their harp and to bend those strings. There wasn't a lot of music for that was easy enough to play for beginners or to sight read. So I remember I used to sight read your songs on gigs all the time. They were perfect, relaxing background music. And I just want to say, incidentally, I just looked over the Wisconsin State Music Teachers Association list, and I petitioned to add 2 or 3 of your pieces. You know, they're fun for kids to play, and it gives them an incentive, and it makes them want to play, want to participate in these. Well, they're not really contests. I get they're festivals. If they've got something that they enjoy playing in a festival, then they'll do it. Okay, so Julia, your first compositions published by Paradise Music. Would you talk a little bit about your first publisher?
My first publisher was Paradise Music. It was owned by Mary Radspinner, a very lovely lady, and she published a fine catalog of music for the lever harp. She published Prelude Orientale and The Lost Princess for me. After I got those on the market, I was off and running. She had many, many wonderful, wonderful pieces in her catalog. And after that, I had pieces published by Faith Carman and her FC Publishing Company. Faith was so kind to sell my other pieces as well, and she published Waltz and Sea and New Orleans Stomp for me. She was a lovely person, and it was great fun to sit at her booth at conventions and get to mind the store. So eventually, Faith Carman closed her business, and I continued to self-publish.
I remember when Paradise Music, she would publish on newsprint and send out throughout the country this wonderful catalog. It didn't contain hundreds and hundreds of things, but there were interesting articles, and she was the first person bring to light some of this new, interesting lever harp music from you. And I remember from Darren Reese Rohrbacher, she just helped to bring some of the new composers to the forefront, which I give her so much credit, and I'm so grateful to her for doing that. And then Faith Carman, I remember talking to her at a conference one time. She just thought the world of you. So, Julia, you studied with Louise Trotter, and tell us just something about lessons with Louise.
Oh, I could take up the whole podcast on that subject. Yes, I studied at her house, and we had such a great time. I don't even remember how many years I studied with her, but up through the most recent years of her life, I would go over there and play for her about once a month, and we'd play for each other and have lunch. And I was always her student forever, which was a fine thing.
Oh, and didn't she call you her pupil?
Yeah.
That word pupil, yes.
That's a great word. That's a great word. And Louise was a brilliant harpist and teacher. I was so fortunate to be able to have studied with her. She taught me both classical and pop harp. She taught me how to be a harpist, how to approach the harp business, how to dress for the gig, and so forth. She was a great harpist, a great teacher, a great composer, and arranger for the harp. And she emphasized techniques that were going to show off the instrument and to make sure that the arrangement lay, as she expressed it, well within the hand. I always liked that expression. Her arrangement of Stardust by Hoagie Carmichael is a great example of this. Her trailblazing of playing the harp in so many different styles, classical, pop, jazz, country, folk, Latin, and so forth, she showed the rest of us that it could be done. The harp wasn't just Claire de Lune anymore. No. Louise showed us how the harp could go in so many different directions, from spaghetti rag to Last Date, that wonderful, cool country piano piece of Floyd Kramer, tenderly to Holiday for Strings.
She was a treasure.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
She was an absolute treasure. And we were so lucky to have her so close to us in Houston. And you know, when she played Floyd Kramer's Last Date, she played it just like Floyd played it on the piano. And I remember I used to play that all the time too, and I never could make it sound like Louise. She had that beautiful touch. She could imitate anybody. She was brilliant. I mean, she imitated Willie Nelson, complete with putting on a wig with braids. Remember that?
Oh, yes, and the red leather gloves. So tremendous. Louise taught me how to play pop and Broadway standards and how to make them work in an arrangement for the harp. And she always stressed that sometimes less is more. For example, leaving out elements of a piano arrangement, particularly in the left hand, and replacing it with arpeggios or simpler notations that's not going to muddy up the sound. Moreover, Louise was always such fun to work with, enthusiastic, encouraging, and inspiring. And a little vignette. One time I was playing more, the theme from the movie Mondo Cane at a lesson, and Louise said, you're really missing out if you don't play a verse of this in Latin style. And I have to agree with that. Part of arranging for the harp is having plenty of variety, and Louise would advise, change that left hand, repeat an octave higher, change the key, and so forth, all to keep the listener's attention. And Louise taught me how to introduce a piece to engage the audience before you played, and how a little bit of humor could gain a lot of goodwill. On top of this, Louise was a wonderful friend.
You two were lifelong friends. You really were.
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming that she was an inspiration to you for some of your compositions. Can you name any specific ones that you had her in mind when you wrote?
Absolutely. For one thing, I dedicated a New Orleans Stomp to Louise and composed Waltz for Louise in her memory. Her love of Latin music decidedly rubbed off on me, as shown in the New Age Tango, the Spanish Dance, and La Flamande, or the Flamingo.
So, what is your favorite piece?
My favorite piece is Prelude Orientale, and I want to tell you how beautiful your recording of that is. I always loved that. It was originally published by Paradise Music, and it was also the first piece I ever had published. It has effects of près de la table, harmonics, tympanic sounds, glissandi, and the vibrant sounds, which are like the bended notes on a guitar. And it sets a reflective mood. Prelude Orientale is great fun to play and to show off all these effects on the harp.
Tell us the story about the Lost Princess.
Well, there is actually a story. This is a first for your podcast. No one has ever heard it. So here's the story of the Lost Princess. Once upon a time, a young princess went into the woods playing with her doll. She lost her doll and her way while searching for her doll. The princess hears her father's huntsmen blowing their horns while searching for her. She finds the doll, then they find her and take the sleepy princess home.
Happy ending.
Yes, my goodness.
Would you play it for us?
I would be delighted.
You have another piece called the New Orleans Stomp. I never heard of a stomp. How did that piece come about?
I love ragtime music, and I wanted to play ragtime on the harp with a piece to show off the instrument that actually worked on it. So I composed New Orleans Stomp for this reason, and I love all those pedal slides. They're great fun. The piece is in a classic rag format and great fun to play. The cover is a 19th century engraving of the New Orleans Opera House. New Orleans Stomp contains muffles, pedal slides, glisses, harmonics, and lots of syncopation. Very jazzy. Also composed the Valley Forge rag for the piano.
Speaking of piano, I know that I believe piano was your first instrument. Like a lot of us harpists, piano was our first instrument. I know that in particular you are a superb pianist, and you have a kind of a new playing endeavor. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I have a neighbor, Ben Wren, who is a retired concert pianist and piano teacher. Once a week, we get together and explore the repertoire for one piano, 4-hand duets. This includes compositions by Beethoven, Mozart, Fauré, Joplin, and Gershwin. Beethoven's Opus 6 and Mozart's Crucial 381 have some lovely pieces. It's amazing the terrific amount of repertoire available, and I love that big orchestral sound that you can get with 4 hands on the piano.
Well, so do you have any creative plans for the future?
I have written many compositions that I want to notate on the computer and publish. It's surely easier to write them out longhand. Also, I plan to continue exploring the 4-hand piano repertoire. It is such fun to play both the harp and the piano, as they definitely do feed off each other.
You prefer writing longhand, so perhaps someone listening to this podcast might volunteer to start notating your new compositions for you. Wouldn't that be lovely?
I think so.
All the pieces that we've talked about today are available, on our website, folkharp.com. But are they available anywhere else that you can tell us about?
Right now, you have an exclusive.
This was so interesting getting to know you better, even though we've known each other for years and years. And it's nice for people who play your music to get to know you a little bit better. It makes playing the composer songs so much more meaningful. So thank you for telling us some of your personal stories, especially about Louise. We so enjoyed that.
And Mary, I want to thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I want to thank you and John and Melodies for everything y'all do for the harp world. It's tremendous. And I very much appreciate you carrying my music at Melodies. Thank you so much again.